hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 148 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday afternoon with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, enjoy the content, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. So today is Dennis Quaid's 70th birthday. But rather than do a retrospective, we're going to turn this special day for Dennis. I mean, he's always been such a youthful guy, it's hard to imagine him being as old as 70. But I'm looking back at some of his earlier films and performances. And given the fact that we just had a solar eclipse yesterday, I decided to turn this particular episode into the 13th entry in our apparently popular continuing series of the most underrated film performances. And the movie I'm going to focus on is the 2000 suspense thriller, science fiction, mystery, serial killer, baseball film, Frequency, directed by Gregory Hoblit, which was released now almost 24 years ago. And it could easily be argued that Dennis gave broader performances, did finer film acting in films of the 80s, such as, well, for sure, The Big Easy and Suspect. And he's incredible in Inner Space, which is still a crime that movie wasn't a bigger hit with his old buddy Martin Short and his future bride Meg Ryan. It's such a great science fiction comedy, amazing special effects. He's terrific in DOA, even though the movie isn't entirely successful. In a supporting role, Postcards from the Edge with Meryl, great. So many amazing performances and so many great movies. You know, I've kind of talked about the fact that to me, he's the best actor who was never nominated for an Academy Award. Films he's been in have been nominated for a total of 28, which is it's a pretty significant number. But he's never been nominated, even though there's been Oscar buzz around him at a lot of different times. There were people clamoring for him to get a Best Actor nomination for The Big Easy in '86 because he's phenomenal. I mean, he mastered a very tricky New Orleans accent for that movie. And if you listen, you think he was from New Orleans. Folks down here have a certain way of doing things, Cher. He's fucking great in that movie. And then in 2002, there were two films in the same year for which he got tremendous Oscar buzz. The Rookie, which is a true story, it's a crazy true story of a pitcher, Jimmy Morris, who was a high school history teacher, who he was a baseball coach, and then he made the major leagues. He was somebody who had been kind of a prospect as a kid, blew out his arm, and then suddenly at age 35, he's throwing 100 miles an hour. And true story, and a great movie, and he got Oscar buzz for his performance in that film, didn't get nominated. That was the year that there was some big hitters that year. Adrian Brody ended up winning for The Pianist that year. And you had Jack Nicholson in easily a top 5 greatest Jack Nicholson performance in About Schmidt. I thought Jack should have, well, I don't want to say should have won. Jack could have won. I thought he was going to win because he did something completely unlike Jack. He was playing a character his real age and kind of a sad sack. Far be from the Jack of his next movie, Something's Gotta Give, 60 plus and still, let's just say, gawking at 20-year-olds. Not making any judgment, but that was his character in that movie. He's with Amanda Peet and then the mom, and it's a little weird. But anyway, Quaid did not get a Best Actor nomination for The Rookie, even though there was a lot of heat around that and buzz. And Todd Haynes' terrific film, Far From Heaven, with Julianne Moore, who he worked with again in, May, December, the recent film, which was very fucked up. People were saying that, well, Dennis is definitely going to get a supporting actor nomination, and it didn't happen there either. So he's somebody who has just done good work. He's been in a lot of hit films over the years, and some of those 80s classics I mentioned, if you actually watch them, you'll be like, holy shit, this guy's fucking awesome. And he was in The Right Stuff, which should have won Best Picture in the year of Terms of Endearment. Sorry. I said what I said. Anyway, so Frequency is a film that I feel like a lot of people have seen, and it's still not as widely known as it should be. And it got good reviews, but the reviews weren't as good as I feel they should have been. The Rotten Tomatoes, 70%. The Metacritic was also in that ballpark. The IMDb score was pretty good. It's in this like 7.5 range, which is a solid score. But the movie should be more widely beloved, because if you go to audience scores, the audience score on this film, if you just Google it, is 4.8 out of 5, which is a crazy high score. What it means is critics found fault with various components of the movie, and I could too. I could pick this movie apart and point out the ridicularity, no problem. But this movie is magic. There is an alchemy to the performances, to the way the film seamlessly shifts back and forth through time, and the performances. And yeah, Jim Caviezel seems to have kind of gone off the deep end a little bit in the last couple of years. And Sound of Freedom was a huge hit. A lot of people really liked it. A lot of people were disturbed. There were issues with the producer, not very good. But he's a talented actor. Passion of the Christ, I mean, my God, the brutality. But he's somebody who is going to give it his all. Even in a movie like this, where you're not necessarily, you got to show off the acting chops, or a film like Snake Eyes with J-Lo, which was right around the same time frame. He doesn't take any movies off. You know what I'm saying? He's not a guy that's ever picked up a paycheck. When he had the show Person of Interest, he was very strong on that show. He's just a really solid actor. Thin Red Line, the Terrence Malick film from the late 90s with Sean Penn. His talent is not ever in question. Whatever stuff he might say in an interview that might make people upset, or he's really good. And it's difficult. It's almost impossible to do what Dennis Quaid and Jim Caviezel do in this film, because they're separated by literally 3 decades, and you still feel the chemistry between them. And I don't know how they pulled it off. There's so many different elements of this film where even now I've seen it 6 or 7 times. I saw it with my sister the day it opened at the Broadway Mall multiplex in Hicksville in 2000. I still can't believe there are certain elements that work, but they do. And so we meet Dennis. His character, Frank Sullivan, is a New York City firefighter. And it's 1969. And we're heading into the 1969, the infamous, famous 1969 World Series, the moon landing. That's the backdrop for this. And he has a son, John, or as he calls him in the film, Little Chief. And Quaid's character is a heavy smoker, but he loves his family. He has a motorcycle. And there's really wonderful scenes of Dennis as a father bonding with the son. And no spoilers here. This is all very early in the movie. Frank Sullivan dies in a fire. We get enough, and there's enough of Dennis Quaid's famous smile, because the thing that Dennis Quaid, they used to say about this guy, was he was a character actor who looked too much like a conventional leading man to actually be a character actor. So it's like, Billy Bob Thornton came on the scene before we knew what a great writer he was. That's what a character actor is supposed to look like. Somebody who can be versatile, play different roles, put on different hats, and do it all well. Dennis Quaid basically looks like a matinee idol movie star. He always did. And he always had the incredible physique. This is a guy who was a fitness junkie before that was even a thing. You look at him, some of the shirtless scenes in movies of the 70s and 80s, this fucking guy was dialed in 100% of the time. He didn't look like a character actor, and that's why he ended up having the career that he did and got to work with major stars like Cher, and he holds his own with Cher. Cher's phenomenal. It's the same year that she won the Oscar for Moonstruck, the movie Suspect, directed by Peter Yates. There's one. If you like a good suspense thriller, courtroom mystery type story, highly recommend it. And Dennis is great in that movie. You could say that he actually steals the film from Cher, and Liam Neeson, very young, was in that. Really, really solid film. But we get enough in the early scenes to kind of understand this guy. His flaws, his foibles, but also his love for his wife, played terrifically well by Elizabeth Mitchell, and his son, Little Chief, Johnny. And then he dies in a fire. And when we meet Jim Caviezel, who is Little Chief grown up, he's a cop. So there's like a little bit of humor because the firefighters don't like the cops, and then the son ended up becoming a cop and not a firefighter. But Frank Sullivan had this old ham radio, And I had heard of it, but I didn't really know what a ham radio was. And he had a license to operate this ham radio. Apparently that was a big thing, that you could have the equipment, but unless you were licensed, you really weren't supposed to be screwing around trying to find people around the world with this radio. So it's now supposed to be like 1999 or 2000. It's 3 decades later. And of course, the events of the 1969 World Series and the moon landing are 30 years prior. It's all in the dustbin of history. Not really the dustbin of history if you're a diehard Mets fan, but it's something that happened and everybody in the know can recite chapter and verse. Here's what happened in the 69 World Series, and here's what Neil Armstrong said on the moon, and all of that kind of stuff. So we meet Jim Caviezel, and he's struggling, he's frustrated, because it appears that either his marriage has ended or a very serious relationship is ending, and his father has been gone for all of these years because he died in this terrible fire. And he's kind of monkeying around with his ham radio one night, and it's during the Aurora Borealis. There are northern lights, and there's a lot of strange sunspot activity. This is what I mentioned at the beginning, at the jump of this episode, the solar eclipse yesterday. There is a lot of solar activity, sunspots, and the Aurora Borealis, and a lot of crazy visuals to represent that there's weird shit going on in the Earth's atmosphere, and there's strange goings on. Feels very mystical and very science-y. So he locks on a couple of positions, and then he finds a frequency very close apparently to where he is, his location in Queens, and he starts chatting with a guy, and he realizes it's his dad. He realizes that there is some kind of crazy space-time continuum breach that has been made possible by the solar flares, the solar activity, the sunspots, the Aurora Borealis. And here he is, John Sullivan, a little chief, talking to his dad, who has been dead for 30 years, across this crazy space-time continuum breach on the same ham radio. They're literally sitting in the same spot. So Dennis Quaid, who his character is gone, re-enters the story. And we see him a couple of days before he's going to perish in this terrible fire. So without giving away all of the mechanics of plot, because this is a film to seek out and to love, because I don't know anyone, I'm not exaggerating, I don't know anyone who does not love this movie. If they've seen it, they always say, oh my God, one of my favorites. And you can verify right now, for anybody watching this, ask your friends, have you seen the movie Frequency? This guy on YouTube is saying that everybody loves this movie. I will go down on the hill that anyone you know who you ask, if they have seen it, their eyes will light up. They will say, holy shit, I love that movie, or words to that effect. And if I'm wrong, you light me up in the comments. That's how confident I am. It is just such a great movie, even with the crazy contortions of plot. So the story, as I said, bounces back and forth through time, and father and son team up across 30 years to try to solve a terrible series of crimes. But then you start, from the butterfly effect perspective, wondering, well, if they do this, what happens to that and this and that? And there are a series of things that wouldn't have occurred that now do, and did occur, and now this. And needless to say, thanks to the help of the son, Frank Sullivan doesn't die in that fire. But stopping the serial killer has ripple effects, significant ripple effects. And then there are other people whose lives are at risk, and the story goes from there. But to focus on what Dennis does in this movie, if we just isolate on him, his film acting, his performance, he doesn't have to give a big, broad, actorly performance. He has the Queen's accent down pat. He has the vocal inflections of somebody who smokes. This is not something that I really paid attention to when I first saw it, but he delivers his lines in such a way where we know this is a smoker that we're talking about. And the fact that he smokes is also part of the movie. well, what if in one iteration of this run out, because this is an everything everywhere all at once, there are multiple potential run outs. You change this and then 6 other things are going to happen. So the fact that he smokes is essential to the story. It's critical to the plot that he is a smoker. And what if he simply stops smoking? What permutations will sprout? Which version of the Matrix? So what goes wrong in the version of the Matrix where Frank Sullivan stops smoking and they stop a serial killer? What else can go wrong? A lot. But Dennis Quaid, because of his ability to have chemistry with other actors, and you see this all throughout his filmography, even in some of his lesser movies, he's just somebody who is very affable. That the big smile, and obviously he's an attractive guy. He's always been able to connect with his co-stars, even in movies that really aren't that good, like Tough Enough, where he played a country western singer who fancies himself a boxer and enters a series of tough man contests. The movie is absurd. It's total absurdity. But it works because of him and because of the way he's able to connect with his co-stars. And PJ Soles, who had been in the movie Stripes just recently before that, with Bill Murray, plays his wife in the movie. And Wilford Brimley, already looking like he's pushing 70. He was like 45. But Wilford Brimley, before, it was the same year that he did The Thing, he plays Dennis's dad. And Warren Oates, in what I believe was his last performance, speaking of Bill Murray, Sergeant Hulka with the big toe will stick that. Okay, I won't do the whole scene. But Warren Oates, hard-bitten, tough actor. He has great chemistry with Dennis in that movie. So it's on him, and it's because of his ability to interact that we feel the bond between the father and son, not just us knowing that, holy shit, this is incredible. This guy is supposed to die in this fire, and because of this crazy space-time continuum breach, he's still alive. Well, that fucked up about 30 other things, but at least he's not dead from the fire. Now he can die of lung cancer or something else. I'm not exaggerating. What he's able to do is draw us into the story with the emotion in his voice, with the look on his face, and the fear. See, Caviezel doesn't come across this way. He has a moment where he kind of tries, but I feel like it doesn't hit the same way because he is playing the younger character. When Dennis, as Frank Sullivan, the moment in the movie where his character realizes, holy shit, I'm talking to my son, and he's about the same age there than I am now. The look on his face is something you can't teach in an acting class, but also he's already carrying the years and the weight of somebody who has had a tough life and has smoked. But as somebody who was already a fan of Dennis Quaid's, he's carrying the weight of those performances in the 80s when he was the hotshot, the young buck. He's not playing that anymore. He's believable as a father of a small boy, as somebody who is about to get a lifeline when he realizes, son of a bitch, I'm going to die in a couple of days if I don't listen to this guy, if I don't listen to my son 30 years in the future. But he's never less than believable and compelling as Frank Sullivan. He takes the crazy turns of plot seriously. He's not winking at the audience, and nobody's calling attention to how batshit crazy this story is. Another great actor who just recently passed, Andre Braugher, plays one of the best. I think he's the best friend of Frank Sullivan in the world of 1969. And through a crazy series of twists, it looks like Frank might be the killer. And it's such a great, I guess because I'm a baseball fan, even though I hate the Mets and I've always hated the Mets. But bear in mind, the World Series hasn't happened yet. But to the son, it happened 30 years ago. So he basically, there's a scene, and we think it's a throwaway, where Jim Caviezel, as Little Chief, tells his father what happens in the World Series. In game 1, this happens. In game 3, this happens. In game 5, we win it all. And obviously, Frank Sullivan knows the insanity of what's going on. So he basically tells him, bro, I know this sounds fucking stupid, but I'm communicating with my son 30 years from now. Well, how do you prove something like that to somebody? Well, how about if a game that is in progress right now, a World Series game that is happening now, you know what's going to transpire. You know that a guy is going to get hit in the foot, and the umpire isn't going to see that the pitch hit the batter in the foot, but the batter is going to say, it hit my shoe. There will be shoe polish on that baseball. Dennis Quaid, with a straight face, tells Andre Braugher this fantastical, idiotic story, which isn't a story. Because in about 30 seconds in the game that's going on now, the guy is going to get hit by a ball, and he's going to get to take first base because the umpire is going to say, son of a bitch, there is shoe polish on this baseball. The look on Andre Braugher's face when he realizes what's going on is gold. It's one of the biggest laughs in the movie in what should be a very tense scene. Oh my God, Dennis Quaid's character is going to be locked up for murder. And then all of a sudden, no, he's not. No, he's not, because he just said something so outlandish, and 30 seconds later, it happened exactly as he said it was going to happen. Now, I don't always like when movies tug at the heartstrings in a cheap way. And Dennis is referring to his son in the 60s when he is his little boy, and then speaking to him over the radio when, even though they're the same age, he's still his kid. And his repeated use of referring to the son as Little Chief. It could be maudlin. It could be over the top. But because of the sincerity in Dennis's performance, because of his ability to hold a close-up, the intensity of his eyes, no, he eats the lens. Again, he's an attractive man. Because of the way that he delivers his lines, every time he says Little Chief, as the movie goes on, it's hard not to get misty. It's hard not to tear up. And and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to spoil this one moment. It happens early in the film. There is an extraordinary moment where it's nothing that Dennis says. We don't see him, but he writes a message. He writes a message to his son after he does not perish in the fire. I'm still here, Little Chief. I mean, it's almost like waterworks early in the film. We don't even know how crazy the story is going to go. And that use of the phrase Little Chief, every time he says it, you feel it. So there is this murder mystery plot. There is a serial killer plot. There is the MCU alternate universe, multiverse angle. It's all here in this one movie. Oh, and there's a love of baseball. Baseball's really America's sport. Sorry, football. Baseball's really America's sport. Fathers and sons bonding over a catch, over a motorcycle ride, over learning how to ride a bicycle, over telling your dad, you probably should quit smoking pop. Yeah, you know something? You're right. And then the incredible trickery of manipulating objects over the decades. And this is something crazy that I would think of this. This is something that actually happened in the movie Hard to Kill, a Steven Seagal film from 1990, where his character, years earlier, he's in a house and he records this video footage which incriminates a senator, played by William Sadler. What a great actor. It's not a great movie, but William Sadler plays this totally corrupt senator. And Steven Seagal pretty much buries this incriminating evidence somewhere in his house, so should something happen to him, nobody's going to find it. And 7 years later, after he wakes up from a coma, the original title of Hard to Kill was 7 Year Storm. His character's name is Mason Storm. Great title. They should have used that one. He goes back to his old house, breaks some walls, busts his way through, and sure enough, there's the evidence. There's the camera right there. There are scenes in Frequency with that kind of, I don't even know if you could say detective work, but I'm going to put something somewhere and I need you to find it in 1999. Sure, let's do it. Noah Emmerich, he's been in a lot of movies, and I usually don't like his performance style. I don't love the way he reads his lines in The Truman Show. I feel like if that movie has the slightest weakness, it might be him. I like him in the movie Miracle with Kurt Russell. But this movie, he's very good. At a similar kind of part, he plays the best friend that he's been friends with Little Chief since they were children. There's one great moment that has nothing to do with Dennis Quaid, even though his character is in there. So his character is called Gordo. And it's interesting that he's Gordo because in the movie The Right Stuff, more than 15 years prior, Dennis Quaid played a real-life astronaut, famous astronaut, one of the first, named Gordo, or Gordon Cooper, but he went by Gordo. I feel like that's why they call this particular character Gordo, a little mild callback to an earlier Dennis Quaid classic film. But the character of Gordo, played by, as I say, Noah Emmerich, he says, he's talking to himself, his baby 7-year-old self. And he says, kid, I need you to listen very carefully, and I'm going to say a word, and I need you to remember this word. And when you start to see this word, the first time you hear of it, he pretty much tells him to invest every cent that he has when he hears this word in real life. And the word he says, he just goes, Google. You imagine in 1999 or 2000 telling somebody the word Google in 1969. Say, when you start to hear this all over the place, invest in it. So that's something that pays off in a comedic way. Just hold on a sec. I don't want to go into any more spoilers. I will just say that the film seems to back itself into a corner with all of the multiversal angles, with all of the potential pitfalls and things that can go wrong. It seems to back itself into a corner, but then it figures out, it's a little like Doctor Strange near the end of Endgame, where he runs every single potential permutation of the battle that's to come. And he only comes up with like one or two where they don't all get killed, where they actually succeed. The movie here, Frequency, they figure out the one angle, the one way to wrap up the story, to close the book, no more multiverse, and let's just let the chips fall where they may. And the ending is unlikely, but perfect and beautiful. And I'm not going to, as I say, I'm not going to spoil it. But every scene in which Dennis Quaid appears is memorable just by his presence on screen. And you think about it, I am not really spoiling anything when I say that he and Jim Caviezel don't actually share very much screen time, and they probably didn't work together for more than a day or so during the making of this movie. Because if you think about it, you have the first unit filming Dennis Quaid talking on the ham radio, and then 2 weeks prior or a month prior or 2 months later or something, you have the same first unit recording Jim Caviezel, recording his side of the same conversation. They wouldn't have met. There would have been no reason to do it that way because you had to redress the sets. The house doesn't look exactly the same, all of these things. So the two guys spent very little actual time in each other's presence, kind of like, in a weird way, Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, where William Shatner and Ricardo Montalban, they're never in the same room. They're interacting in what appears to be real time, but they didn't appear in any scenes together. They couldn't have. It's impossible. They were never on the set at the same time on the same day. They're co-stars. Yeah, never met the guy. And these two guys, Dennis Quaid and Jim Caviezel, would have only met at most 2 days of filming. At most. And that's pushing it. It probably was 1 day. 1 day of filming. But I love the performance by Dennis Quaid. Not his best film acting, but one of his most memorable turns. And he loves baseball. We know this. And he played Jimmy Morris, as I said, a couple of years later. He's a sports fan. He loves football, loves baseball. He's actually a really accomplished musician. Is it Dennis and the Sharks? I forgot the name of his band, but they actually played at the Paramount right up the block from where I used to live in Huntington Village. I think they played there 2 separate times. And he's supposedly good. And when he made Great Balls of Fire, the Jerry Lee Lewis story in the late 80s, that was almost at the peak of his fame, he recorded all of Jerry Lee Lewis's songs in the hope that they would use his vocals instead of the Killer. That was Jerry Lee Lewis's nickname. But they weren't going to do that. They didn't want to take any chances. They used the original Jerry Lee Lewis vocals. But he is a talented musician and a really terrific film actor. He's probably never going to get an Oscar nomination if he hasn't gotten one by now. But I've always been a fan, going back to the first time I saw The Right Stuff, and he's plays the smart aleck. But he has a way on screen. He always had, even in lesser films like The Intruder wasn't very good. And some of the more recent work that he did, even in Cold Creek Manor, which was really lousy, not good, but he's always believable. And you almost never sense him phoning it in. The guy is always going to give you what he's got. He's a lunch pail guy. If he were an athlete, that's what he'd say. He's a lunch pail guy. He's a workman-like performer. But he has the skill and has shown the skill to play a wide range of characters. And in this particular movie, he is always believable as Frank Sullivan, a firefighter who was supposed to die in a fire, and because of a crazy space-time continuum breach, thanks to solar flares, sunspots, and the aurora borealis, he and his son are able to solve a series of crimes, and he's not going to die in the fire that he is supposed to die from in this new version, this new iteration of The Matrix, basically. We like this one better. At least he has a fighting chance now. And if we could just get him to stop smoking, maybe we'll really have something. Dennis Quaid as Frank Sullivan in the marvelous 2000 sci-fi suspense thriller, serial killer, baseball, father-son, four-hanky weeper drama, Frequency, directed by Gregory Hoblet, available on streaming, but to my knowledge, it's not free on streaming anywhere, but it is absolutely worth the $2 rental on Apple or Amazon Prime. You will love this movie. The 13th entry in our continuing series, Most Underrated Film Performances, Dennis Quaid as Frank Sullivan in the 2000 film Frequency. Got a little emotional again, can't help it. This movie, it always brings that makes the eyes misty. And that's something that people will tell you, be prepared to cry. Bring your hankies. It's that kind of movie. And never in a maudlin or treacly way. The tears and the laughs and the emotion is well earned. Good job by everyone right up and down the line in the cast. This has been episode 148 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. By the way, happy birthday to Dennis Quaid. Happy 70th. But if you caught this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, comment, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 149 real soon. Until then, I'm still here, little chief. Peace.